Hello fantastic creatures, I'm fantasims and welcome to my channel. In today's tutorial I'll show you how to create perfect circles with the new rotate around the center feature of the tool mod. I made these 19 gold rings of power to rule them all. Sauron has nothing on these rings. Sorry, if you're a Lord of the Rings fan you'll get what I'm saying. Anyway, there are two ways to create circles, either upright as I'll show you first, or on the ground and then rotate the ring upright when you're done, which I'll show you later. The benefit of rotating the circle upright is that you get a better sense of the size, which helps if you're trying to create arches, windows, portals, etc. The benefit of rotating the circle on the ground first is that it might be easier to align the objects either side. So I'll show you both methods and you can decide which one works best for you. Now, I wanted to rotate multiple circles at different sizes for a project I'm working on, so that's what you'll see me doing here. To start, you'll need some sort of post or object with a perfectly centered green footprint upon which to place the object you want to be turned into a circle. I chose the Discover University green banner post because it's skinny and easy to rotate. The reason you need the posts and not just the objects you want to turn into a circle is because the posts create the center from which the whole circle will rotate. I tried doing it with just the objects alone and they did not create a perfect circle. So here I just resized the post by clicking scale in the tool mod menu and starting with a size of 2, continued to go down by increments of 0.1 each time. So 1.9, then 1.8, 1.7 and so on down to 0.1 to make 19 different ring sizes. Now obviously if you're only creating one circle size, you don't need to do this. Also, as I'll show you in a minute, you can actually make several circles at the same time using one post instead of 19 like I did here, but it would not have worked for all 19 rings I wanted to make because not all the objects would fit on the same posts. But I probably could have done 3 or 4 rings on the same post at least. I just didn't think of it until after I made these. So it is an option to save time that I will show you. Okay, so next I did the same thing for the gold bars I was using as the object I want to rotate into a circle, starting with a size of 3 and working down in 0.1 increments for each one. I later had to change the sizes slightly once I made a ring because they were either slightly too big or slightly too small, but at least this was a good starting point to make smaller rings because the original size of the object was just too big for the smaller circles. Okay, now select the object you're turning into a circle. So in my case, it's these gold bars. By clicking on the first one to highlight it green, then holding down the Alt key whilst clicking the rest of the objects, then hold down the Alt and Shift keys together whilst clicking on one of the highlighted green objects. It will duplicate all the highlighted objects. Then select Rotate from the tool menu. Make sure the axis circle is in the right direction as shown here and type in 180 and hit OK because you need it to be 180 degrees to flip it upside down. That way you can place one of the objects on top of the post and one on the bottom. We need a mirror image of these gold bars because the rotate around center feature of tool mod requires a mirror image on both sides in order to make a perfect circle. Then it's time to duplicate the post we will be using as a guide for the circle. Keep in mind the post will be half the width of the final circle, so once your post is the size you want it, you will then duplicate it with tool mod because it will clone the object to the exact same size as the original. Elevate the cloned post above the original one because that's how much room you will need to rotate the object around the center. After you have finished elevating the post to the center, delete the original post underneath. We need to elevate the gold bars to the top of the post tip, but keep in mind that you can only elevate so far with the 9 key. The rest we will have to use tool mod. Now of course this is only applicable if you're making a ginormous ring like I am. If your circles are smaller you won't run into this problem, but I'm showing you in case you do. Now this next instruction is important. When you are elevating the object with tool mod, only elevate by whole numbers like 1, 2, 3 and so on, and then increments of 0.1 if you need to finesse the height. So let's say you elevate by 1 or 2 and it's still slightly too low on the post, just elevate it by an additional 0.1, 0.2, 0.3 and so on. Why? Because we need the gold bars on the bottom mirror image to be in the exact same location on the other side, and since pressing the 9 and 0 keys are the equivalent of elevating or lowering by 0.1 with tool mod, it will be much easier to position the bottom gold bars later. So for example, if you were to elevate by 2.25, that extra 0.05 added to the 2.2 is a fraction that you just can't replicate with the 0 or 9 keys, so it's much harder to figure out the math when placing the gold bars at the bottom of the post. I hope that made sense, but if it didn't, hopefully the visual of placing the bottom bars will help. So as you can see me doing here, I'm just tweaking each post by elevating by 0.5, 1.5, 0.3, 0.1. So long as it's in increments of 0.1, it will work perfectly. Now it's time to make the mirror image that will reflect what we just did but upside down. So we will duplicate the posts that we elevated earlier by selecting them whilst holding the Alt key and then holding down the Alt and Shift keys to duplicate them all. Again, if you're only making on one circle, you just need to click on the post to highlight it, then duplicate it. Then rotate those duplicates that are highlighted green by 180 degrees like we did with the gold bars to make a mirror image. Now we have the top to bottom length of the circle, and the thicker part of the post in the middle is the center from which our gold bars will rotate around. Now this part is probably the trickiest and is the reason rotating on the ground versus upright like this might be easier for you. Basically, we want the gold bars on the bottom to be in the exact location they are on the top of the posts. I chose to elevate the top gold bars high enough that the very tip of the green post can still be seen through. That way it's easier to figure out how high or low to set the bottom gold bars. So I elevated or lowered the bottom gold bars to allow the green tip to poke through just like on the top. Since I made sure to only elevate the top ones in increments of 0.1, I knew that I could just use the 9 or 0 keys to position them properly. So that meant that if I pressed the 0 key to lower the gold bars and it covered the green tip so it was no longer visible, I knew that I had lowered it too far. So now it's the fun part of actually rotating our gold bars into a circle. Now in the original footage I failed to show a couple of things you can do to make the process even easier, so I've jumped back into the game to re-record this portion and include those simpler options. So instead of making all 19, of course I've deleted some of the smaller ones. Even though I wouldn't have been able to do what I'm about to show you for all 19 of them, what I could have done is layered some of these gold bars so that there are several on one post. The only thing that I would recommend though is that you'd have to elevate from the center, so you'd have to find out where the exact center is. So right here, and then select it with tool mod, shift alt click to duplicate, rotate it by 180 so you get the mirror image, and then elevate this one. Let's try 8, see how high that goes. Okay, so let's say we put that one there, although actually we'll have to lower it because in the end we're going to be flipping this upside down and we need enough space. So let's lower this by 2. So elevate minus 2. So 8 minus 2 is 6. Actually, we could go up one more. Elevate 1. So 7. So ultimately we elevated it 7. So this one we will lower. Elevate by minus 7. And then it's equal on both sides. And that would have probably been an easier option than what I just showed you previously about trying to make sure that I elevated it high enough to see the green poking through and then making sure I did that on the bottom. If I would have just put them at the center and then elevate them and lower them like I just showed you, that's actually easier. So hey, it's all a growing experience. And then the next one we'll line up at the center and do the same thing again, where we'll select it, shift alt to duplicate, rotate it by 180 degrees, and then let's elevate this one by 5 and then lower this one by minus 5. Okay, and I'm not going to do any more than 3. So even though this is an easier way to do it, I still wouldn't have been able to do it for all 19 circles that I made. And the benefit of doing it this way is see how they slope down. That way the tiniest circle ends up still being at ground level and not all the way elevated up in the middle of the air like that. So that might actually be easier to still do it this way so that you don't have to worry about elevating and lowering. So either way works. Now before we get rotating, another thing I didn't think to do until I'd already created the wheel is to duplicate and rotate these in advance to create a mirror image. So if we select these by just holding down the alt key and then we shift alt click on one of them so it duplicates all the gold bars, and then we rotate and we do 180 degrees, we now have a mirror image, and that will just create a rounded shape, which I wanted for these rings, but you don't have to have one on either side. You might like the flat side of the back. And so then we're going to go over to options, toggle group again to select them all, and then we'll hold down the shift and the alt key and click on it, and then we're going to go to rotate, but this time we're going to make sure that rotate around the center is selected, and we need to change the axis because we don't want it going that way. But I forgot we've encountered a problem where it's considering, for some reason, it's considering this part as being the center. So if we try to rotate now by 90 degrees, let's say, see, it's going to treat this as the center, and we want this to be the center. I completely forgot about that, but I'm glad that it's showing you this now so that you can see how to remedy it. So I've just moved that off to the side. So that actually means that you can't use the toggle group feature for this part of it, which is good to know because I thought that would save time, but apparently it will not. So instead, let's get rid of the toggle grouping box by hide grouping box. So the original way I did it actually does work best, and that's to choose one of the posts first. It doesn't matter whether it's the top one or the bottom one, but just click on it and then alt click on everything else. It's a bit more time consuming, but it seems to be the only way that gets it to rotate around the correct center that we want. Okay, so I've selected them all, and then I'm going to shift and alt, hold those keys down together and click on it, and it will duplicate it. And then we're going to rotate, make sure rotate around the center is on, and yet look, now the center is right where it's supposed to be. So it seems like, I'm new to this, so I'm learning this too, but it seems like the first object you click on is the one that it uses to determine determine where the center of the object is going to be. I could be wrong. Twisted Mexi might need to correct me on that, but from what it seems like, that seems to be the way. So make sure you click on the post first, and we're going to rotate it by 90 degrees to create a cross. Okay, and then we're going to hold down the Alt key and we're going to include all these other original pieces. So clicking on all of these. Okay, then we're going to duplicate again by holding down Shift and Alt and clicking on one of the objects. This time we're going to rotate by 45 degrees to fill in the gap between these 90-degree increments. So 45 degrees, okay, and that fills in that. Again, we're going to select all of these pieces. Okay, our pieces are selected, so now we're going to do it again. Shift Alt click to duplicate, and we are going to rotate. This time we're going to do half of 45 degrees, which is 22.5. Okay, and then you can either go through and select all these objects again, or just duplicate what's already highlighted and rotated, but we're going to have to do that several times. So just to make it easier, I'm going to select all of these extra objects again. Okay, now that they're selected, I'm going to Shift Alt click to duplicate them, and this time we're going to rotate by 11.25 because that's half of 22.5, and it'll put it right here, 11.25. Okay, look at that, we're starting to get our circle. Now half of 11.25 is 5.625. So I'm not going to select all of these ones again because that's just going to take too long. So I'm just going to hold down the Shift Alt click to duplicate the original highlighted green ones, and we're going to rotate by 5.625. Okay, it'll fill in that gap. We don't want to do 5.625 again because that's this position. We want to go back to rotating it by 11.25. So hold down the Shift Alt click, rotate by 11.25. Okay, and that's it. We've got our wheel done. Now, sometimes that might not be, you might still have gaps and you might need to do it even more. Like you might need to do half of 5.625, which is 2.8125. But anyway, you can also do it in increments of 10, 5, and 2.5, but it might not fill in the gaps properly, but I'll show you how to do that. Okay, so we're back to the original post that we started with. Shift Alt click to duplicate, and this time, so let's say that we just rotate it by 5, okay, and then we select the rest of the objects by holding down the Alt key and just clicking on them. Okay, so they're highlighted. Now we duplicate them again, and this time we will rotate by 10, so rotate by 10, and then you can highlight the rest of these. Oops, I do that all the time. I unhighlighted everything, so make sure that the post gets clicked first. If you accidentally click on something and you have to re-highlight it, make sure the post gets clicked first so that the center remains here. Okay, so I've reselected everything, and you can Shift Alt click to duplicate that section and then rotate by 20, okay, and then just Shift Alt click again, rotate 20, okay, Shift Alt click again, rotate 20, Shift Alt click again, rotate 20, Shift Alt click again, rotate 20, okay, Shift Alt click again, rotate 20, okay, 2 more times, Shift Alt click again, rotate 20, and last time Shift Alt click, rotate 20, and you'll get a circle as well. The only thing is that doing it this way, even though it's the math side of things is probably easier for you to remember, it actually uses more objects, because if you're going in increments of 5 degrees rather than 5.6 degrees, you're going to be using a few more objects, which over time in a build can cause a bit more lag, which is why I prefer halving the degrees, so like 90 degrees, 45 degrees, 22.5, 11.25, 5.625, and 2.8125. So I find that easier, but if you're okay with doing it this way and this way works better for you, then do it that way. Now, here are the finished 19 gold circle rings, and you may be asking, what can I do with rings like this? Well, other than creating wheels, circular windows, portals, or anything else that requires a rounded shape, you can also reshape them by overlapping rings over each other like I'm doing here. Then you just delete the excess objects and you're left with pointed oval shapes, or if you delete the bottom half of this pointed oval, you have the perfect arch shape for making the top of an arched doorway for a medieval castle. Of course, you'd still need to create the straight sides with additional gold objects, but I'll probably end up showing you how to do that in a future video if you're not sure how to accomplish this. For me, I'm trying to create this gold city that has a lot of circular and oval shapes. So here is an example of me tilting the rings in different positions to make unique shapes, because this city has some gold walkways at different sloping angles. So I just selected the ring and made sure the rotate around center was selected, and then tilted the rings back by different degrees to get them to flow into each other. Alright, now here's an example of how you can create the circle flat on the ground first and then elevate and rotate it upright after. We're basically going to follow the same method as before, but this time we will rotate the post on its side, so you'll want to rotate the post backwards by minus 90 degrees to get it flat on the ground. Then duplicate and rotate by 180 degrees to get the mirror image. Do the same with the objects you're turning into a wheel, and then position them sideways at either end of the post at the exact same spot along the post. Make sure to have the F5 key on on your keyboard pressed for more precise placement. Now here I'm making a huge ring the size of a 64 by 64 tile lot, so I made my posts and gold bars quite huge, but rotating it is exactly the same as before. You want to highlight the posts and objects and duplicate them. Rotate around the center by 90 degrees, highlight all the objects, duplicate and rotate this group by 45 degrees. Then select all the objects again, duplicate and rotate by 22.5 degrees. Select them all again, duplicate and rotate by 11.25. Select them all again, duplicate and rotate by 5.625. This time, just duplicate the ones already highlighted and rotate by 11.25. Duplicate the highlighted ones and rotate by 2.8125. I know that sounds crazy, but it's half of 5.625. Then duplicate the highlighted ones and rotate by 5.625. Duplicate the highlighted ones and rotate again by 5.625. And then one last time, duplicate the highlighted ones and rotate by 5.625. Now I'll have these instructions typed out in the description below to help you guys. Then select all the gold bars or whatever object you're using, duplicate and rotate without the rotate around center feature to flip all the objects inwards 180 degrees if you want the circle to look the same on the outside and inside. Now if you decided to rotate the wheel on the floor first before lifting it up, you're going to have to set the grouping box like I showed you before, holding down shift and clicking on the ground to set the grouping box, and then going to options and toggling the group. That toggles it off. Toggle the group to highlight all of it. Then go over to elevate because you want to elevate before you rotate. And I'm not sure how high I need to do this, but I'm assuming it's going to be a larger number. So let's just try 10. So we're going to lift it up by 10 and then we're going to rotate, and we're still going to need to have rotate around the center clicked. And then it's a positive number because it's the thinner part of the line. The thicker part of the line is a negative number. The thinner part of the axis line is a positive number. So we want to flip it forward. So we're going to do 90 degrees and there you go. And then it will be upright, and then you can elevate and lower it. Actually, that's quite close. You can elevate or lower it however high or low you need it to be, and then you'll have the same effect. Now here's an example of what I've been able to create so far from my Heroes of the Storm inspired build, and how having rings of all different sizes and different shapes can help you to construct something that's really cool looking. Now this is the center of the city, and these shapes probably don't make sense to you right now. Hopefully when I finish the build, you guys will be able to see why it's shaped like this. But anyway, I thought I would throw that in there to give you a sense of why I made so many different rings in the first place. So I hope this tutorial has not been too complicated to follow along with. I'm sure over time I might find an easier way to construct these, but this is my first week playing around with a new tool feature, and this is the best I've come up with so far. If you have any further questions, feel free to ask. I hope this tutorial was helpful. I will definitely be making tons of circles in the future, that's for sure. Anyway, a huge thank you to you guys for watching and commenting on my videos. It's almost my 1-year anniversary on YouTube, and I'm almost at 4,000 watch time hours. Just 300 more hours to go, so thank you for helping me reach my goal, and I freaking love you.